Martin Luther King Jr. Growing up in the South, each year in January, we celebrate Martin Luther King Day. We remember the life and the work of a great leader. Who was he? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15th, 1929. Where King grew up, white leaders made unfair laws that took many rights away from black people. They kept black people and white people segregated or apart. Many places, such as schools, bathrooms, parks, and bus and train waiting rooms, were segregated. The place for black people were not as nice or clean as those for white people. Black people couldn't live in white neighborhoods or marry a white person. As King grew up, he saw how those laws hurt black people. He wanted to help. King goes to school. King started college at the age of 15. He decided to become a minister. At school, King learned about a leader in India who believed in using peaceful protests to help people. King decided to use peaceful protests too. After King finished school, he and his wife moved to Alabama. He became a minister there. Protests in Montgomery. In 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court said that schools couldn't segregate anymore. Black people hoped this meant that other places wouldn't be segregated anymore. In 1955, a black woman named Rosa Parks was riding home on a city bus in Montgomery. Black people had to sit on the back of the bus. They had to give up their seat to a white person if asked. Parks knew this was unfair. When a white man asked for her seat, she did not move. The police arrested her. After Parks was arrested, black people decided to protest. They wouldn't ride the bus until the buses weren't segregated anymore. They put King in charge of the protest. A year later, buses were no longer segregated. The protest had worked. It showed that things could change. It helped King become a well known leader. The Birmingham protests. White people who were angry about desegregation bombed King's house. This did not stop King. In 1963, King went to Birmingham, Alabama to start a protest. Hundreds of people were arrested during the peaceful protests, including King. Black leaders raised money to get protesters out of jail. During another march, the next month, protesters were stopped by the police. The police used fire hoses and attack dogs. Many of the protesters were hurt. When people across the country saw what happened to the protesters, they were angry. Black civil rights leaders and the city leaders made a deal a week later. Birmingham would desegregate. The work continues. King organized more marches and gave a famous speech. He called for equality for all people. The next year, the President of the United States made segregation against the law. The fight for civil rights was not over, though. In 1965, King helped plan a march to protest how black voters were treated in Alabama. King led the protesters, but they did not get far before police attacked them. 3 weeks later, the protesters marched again. This time, members of the U.S. Army sent by the president protected the protesters. On August 6, 1965, the president signed the Voting Rights Act into law. It protected the right of all people of color to vote. King's Memorial. In 1968, a white man shot and killed King in Tennessee. King died on April 4th. People around the world were shocked and sad about his death. In 2011, a memorial for King opened in Washington, D.C. People from all over the world visit it and remember him. They carry on the work for justice and equality.